Hello and welcome back to the Football Heritage Podcast. I'm your host, Rory Bryce, and I'm joined this morning by Adam Salter.
Good morning. Great to be on the pod and great to have a good chinwag about women's football history.
Absolutely. I'm absolutely delighted to have you on, Adam. As we were just saying off air, been chasing you for quite a while because you didn't turn your BlueSky settings on properly, so I couldn't message you on that. But then obviously found out you had an X account and got in touch with you. Adam is the curator, founder and organiser of the Arsenal Women's Archive, which is incredible. It's incredible for any person to volunteer to set up any kind of football archive to begin with. But as we're going to discuss today, to do it with women's football represents a whole different set of challenges, a whole different set of difficulties. There's a lot of different dynamics involved with it. And that's what we're going to be digging into today, really the history of Arsenal's women's team. Then we're going to be discussing more so about the archiving side of things, how the archive was actually built, and some of the different things that Adam has seen come through the archive, like his favourite items, favourite stories, etc. Before we get started properly, Adam, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself, first of all?
Okay, so firstly, yes, my name's Adam, and I have the unfortunate affliction of being an Arsenal fan, for better or for worse. Much suffering, but there's been much joy, especially recently.
Could be the year.
It's been a good year, yeah. We're world champions now, which is nice. So it's been worth it. But if anyone knows anything about the Arsenal and the Arsenal women specifically, they have a very, very, very rich history. And as a personal lover of all things history, it was something that was too fun and too interesting not to ignore and to delve into. It started a few years ago, and it's now just become my life.
Nice. Yeah, I feel the same about this podcast, really. But it's good when something like that happens in... When you said, like, when you are a lover of all things history, and for me, heritage and history obviously kind of comes hand in hand, then it makes sense and it makes it a lot more fun. So, obviously, we're going to be talking everything to do with Arsenal women today, everything to do with the history of the club and what inspired you to build the archive, first of all. But before we begin, let's go through some context, first of all, I suppose. So, for our listeners who might not be aware, obviously, the centre of my attention is Scottish football, and the landscape of Scottish women's football has recently began to professionalise. Obviously, we have the women's SPFL now, was brought under the banner of the SPFL a few years ago, but a lot of the infrastructure that football clubs have is still either semi-pro or worse. And obviously that's because of reasons we've discussed in this podcast before. There was a 50-year ban on women's football in Scotland, and they're very much still catching up because of that. But it means that the league is in this sort of strange place where Glasgow City were the trailblazers, the biggest club, the dominating club for so long. And then Hibs women came along and sort of threw a spanner in the works for that. And then Celtic decided they were going to invest loads of money in their women's teams. And now the landscape has changed a little bit differently. You have other clubs like Montrose, Hamilton, Aberdeen, etc., who are still kind of up and coming. And as I said, they are still catching up where the infrastructure is concerned. But that's in Scotland, and I can imagine that it's been completely different in England for the most part. And Arsenal women really have been one of the trailblazing teams for women's football down south.
Absolutely. There's we're quite proud of our history, and it's a nice trump card to play when certain other teams with more recent success try to put themselves forward and portray themselves the best and say yes, but where's your European trophy, for example, or multiple European trophies, as we say now. We did cross paths with Scotland actually last season in the Champions League qualifiers. We were victorious in that instance, but it's good to see Scottish football on the up because we need. It's not. I know I'm very much an England-centric league fan, but seeing leagues like Scotland on the up, seeing likes of Celtic and Rangers, Glasgow City and so forth, it's really good to see, and that can only go from strength to strength.
Yeah, I mean, that's the hope. And like I said, when we talk about women's football, I think it's good to remind our listeners especially, and to be fair, remind ourselves as well, that there is a lot of things that we could say that we need to caveat and that we need to put in there before we talk about women's football history. As I said, the football ban had, done untold amount of damage to the women's game across the country. But in terms of the Arsenal women, the history of the club, like you said, is incredibly rich and incredibly storied. Tell us a little bit about when Arsenal women were founded, where they came from, and what some of the highs and lows, their successes and some of their failures have been over the years.
Yes, and one of the things, and again, we said just then about sort of failures and setbacks. As much as I celebrate the history of the Arsenal ladies and the Arsenal women as they know now, it's very easy to gloss over some of the setbacks and failures for which there have been at the club. And one of the purposes of going to the archive, jumping ahead slightly, is to highlight both. It's very easy to put on the roasting glasses and talk about how amazing we are. We've been quite bad as well, and I think that is just as important to bring to the light.
100%.
So wind the clocks back. The year is 1987, and there is a team in the Chilterns in England called Aylesbury Ladies who are playing in the Home Counties League, and they're looking for basically a sponsor for the team. Now, I should stress at this point in time, the history is very, very hazy at this moment. There is little to no data or record. And it's one of the areas we're desperately trying to get information on is the 1987-88 season. But there was a league called the Home Counties League, which was basically a regional league. So at that time in the late 1980s, there was no overall league across the country like we have with the WSL, like we have with what was its predecessor, the Premier League, now the National League. So you had these leagues scattered across, and we were in this thing called the Home Counties League. Aylesbury Ladies were, and they played against teams like Friends of Fulham, who eventually became Wimbledon, not to be confused with Fulham. Teams like Red Star Southampton, not to be confused with the other two Southampton clubs that currently exist. Red Star no longer exists. Millwall Lionesses, who are quite a notorious team, and obviously there's been a spin-off since with London City Lionesses, and many others. But it was a regional league, and they were looking for a sponsor, and a chap called Vic Akers, who statistically is the greatest Arsenal manager of all time. People put other players for, but he has won more trophies as an Arsenal manager than any other Arsenal manager ever. And amazing, just incredible what he achieved. And he came in, and he was in the kit man on the men's side, but he wanted to help. So it was like an Arsenal community sort of development thing. He wanted to build up a women's team, and so there was a player at the Aylesbury Ladies called Abby Clement who worked at Arsenal as like a sports teacher, and she put forward the idea of, why don't you take over our team? Aylesbury Ladies were quite good. We recently got to an FA Cup semi-final. The FA Cup at the time, the Women's FA Cup, was pretty much the only competition where teams across the entire country played each other. I think Aylesbury at the time got like a semi-final. They sadly lost to Norwich City, but they were a decent side. They hadn't won anything, but they were a decent side, and so Vic took over the club. The first season was in 1987-88. We know barely anything about it, unfortunately. It's one of the things we're really trying to crack down and find information on, because at the time there's very little reporting. There's no media. There's no videos. There's like nothing. The only means of accessing any data at this point in time is the British Newspaper Archive, and trying to find regional cuttings and newspaper cuttings. Now, what we're quite grateful for is there's a few regional newspapers like the Bucks Herald who covered the Aylesbury Ladies quite well, actually. There's quite a few details, which is quite good. So anything like 1985, 86 and before. But from that point onwards, so we know that the Aylesbury Ladies played in a little village called Cuddington, which I've visited, and it's a charming village. But we don't know for sure if they stayed or if they moved with the move to Arsenal. We've had conflicting, as again, with all things historical, conflicting news reports of they may have moved to Arsenal to play closer in London, in North London. They may have remained for the first season. So it's a bit of a mystery. We don't know what happens then. What we do know is after that, for the late 80s, they played in the Home Counties Leagues. They obviously grew under Vic Akers. They weren't successful as such. Teams like Millwall Lionesses, teams like Friends of Fulham were the bigger hitters at the time. They eventually migrated from the Home Counties League into something called the Greater, I want to get this right, the Greater London Regional Women's League.
It's a mouthful.
Which was about, yeah, it is a mouthful. And that was in about sort of 1990, 1991. Now, in 1991, there was a huge step change in women's football with the development of the Women's FA, so it was WFA, National League. And this was the first time we had a countrywide league. So teams like Doncaster Bells, who were, again, one of the bigger hitters at the time.
Certainly are.
Yeah, those who know their history know the Donny Bells and what an incredible team they were. They were I would say, for modern context, they were the Chelsea of our time. They were that kind of level. So teams like them could then play teams like Millwall Lionesses and Red Star Southampton. So again, this is a bit of an area which is very hazy. Unfortunately, with the Greater London League, I was just going to call him for abbreviation purposes, we don't know much about that season. It's an area I'm in the process of trying to get some information on. What I do know is that season, Millwall Lionesses and Friends of Fulham came first and second in that league. So they were given free pass to go into the Premier Division of this new National League.
Okay.
Arsenal weren't. So Arsenal had to go into the sub-league, which was split. So it had a Northern and Southern Division regional league. And so, which I think Vicaicus at the time was a bit bitter about. He felt that as a team, Arsenal were good enough to be in that top league. And as it happens, in their first season, this was the Southern Division, they romped the title, they went unbeaten. This was at a time when it was 2 points for a win and 1 for a draw. And there was a very critical game at Highbury, they actually played at Highbury, where they beat a team. They beat a team called Abbeydale Alvechurch 3-2. They were their rivals for the top. And they, even though they went unbeaten, Abbeydale pushed them all the way and they just pipped them. And that win against Abbeydale is what got them into the top league, the Premier League, as well, the National League. It was the National League Premier Division, and they have remained in the top division ever since. So from there, they went in 1992-93. They won their first ever Premier League title. That was the season they actually did it. There was a famous game at Highbury on Michael Watson Day. So there was a fundraiser for Michael Watson, who was a boxer who had a traumatic injury. So there was a fundraiser for Highbury, and Vicaicus suggested, well, while we're doing that, why don't we stick our league game against Doncaster Bells there? They did, and Arsenal won 2-1, and that pretty much won them the title. But we get to a point now where there was, at the time at Arsenal, there was a sort of because you get like season review DVDs. They had something similar with on that good old content that was VHS. So they had like a video club thing where they would send out like a season review over VHSs. And one of the things they would do is they would do a small feature on the women's team. So they would do a game that was happening, say, at Leighton Wingate when they were playing. I think it was against Reigate. And this was the 1991-92 season. This is the earliest footage we have of the Arsenal ladies playing. It's in 1992. They beat Reigate 7-1, and you see the players interviewing the players like Joe Churchman. They interview Vicaicus. So by the time 1993, there's a bit of footage of them in this game at Highbury. They also reached the FA Cup final, also against Donny Bells, which they win 3-0, and they also reached the League Cup final, which was played at Wembley, as it happens, the old Wembley, the old White Toon House. So they do a treble. They actually were the reigning champions. They won their first major trophy the season before, their first ever League Cup. And that was their 1992-93 was the first big season of the Arsenal women. They won the treble, put them squarely on the map of they are the team. They are the big team now. They are up there with the Doncaster Bells, your Donny Bells, your Millwall Lionesses. You're up there at the top. And what you saw then for the 90s is it was basically Arsenal and another team competing for the top. So Donny Bells won the season after. That was our last league title. They sort of started to slowly fall away. Arsenal had an incredible season in 95 when they went unbeaten, only dropped 2 points, and that was to Liverpool, and that was at the very end of the season. They also won the FA Cup at Liverpool's ground against Liverpool, although they were now known as Liverpool. I think they were known as Knowsley United. One of the things you learn with the archive is a lot of teams change names. So teams like Liverpool were previously known as Knowsley United. Teams like Everton were known as Leeds Upper Pacific, and trying to keep track of them is a bit of a nightmare. So they were sort of tussling with Donny Bells for the title. Then they were tussling with Croydon for the title. And as the seasons progressed, you get more and more information. One of the brilliant things Arsenal did is, as the women's team grew and became more notorious, they put more and more information in the matchday programs on the men's side. So every time you get one of those, you can go, oh, and this was happening with women's team, and you get match reports. You get the players who have played in the teams. You get goal scorers, and it's a really, really good resource. I can't speak for other clubs and if they did that, but I'm very grateful that from an Arsenal perspective they did. And there are websites which have thankfully preserved a lot of Arsenal matchday programs from to the 90s onwards. That's a growing database, and that's been really good to pull information off. And if not there, then there's good old-fashioned eBay, and hope that somebody is selling the program you're after. One of the issues, though, is because of where the women's team played, they didn't often play in the main stadium. They're playing in lesser stadiums, and they're having to wrestle with trying to get their games in with them, but also the poor quality of the pitch means games often got abandoned. Quite notoriously, in 1994, the league got so delayed, it went into like sort of May, June time. So because the men's team all wrapped up then, we have no visibility of those games. So we don't know who scored in those games. We know the results, but that's about it. So that's what we're sort of wrestling with. As it progresses through, so I think Arsenal won the league in 97. Croydon, who became Tottenham Athletic, then become the top dogs and start winning. Everton win the league and then Croydon become the top dogs. Flash forward to about 2001, Arsenal do the treble. And that's time the team's completely different. So in the past, you had the likes of Joe Churchman, Caroline McGloin, Nazball. Now you've got the likes of Marianne Spacey, Jane Ludlow in the team, Kiara Grant, Emma Burning goal. So when I was doing my work, not just with the archive, but with my work with Wikipedia and learning all these teams, I sort of had to learn them backwards because I went from the present to the past. But it's really interesting now when you go the other way. As you flick through, the names become more and more familiar, and it names that we sort of see on TV nowadays, and pundits on TV. It's really good sort of seeing them come through. So you see the likes of Alex Scott, you see the likes of Anita Asante, as they are sort of growing in this Arsenal team under Vic Akers.
That's class.
It is class. Unfortunately for Arsenal, a big sledgehammer in the name of Fulham comes smashes the league apart, because Fulham are massively ahead of the curve. They are basically what I compare them to is the London City Lionesses of our time. At the time, you talk about Scottish football present. So at the time, it was legal sort of amateur, very much amateur or semi-professional. Arsenal were quite unique. They would employ their players in the club to give them away, to the stories of Alex Scott doing the laundry and cleaning in rights kit. There's stories like Ciara Grant or like Jane Ludlow having roles as like maybe secretaries or roles as like first aiders. They have roles in the club, so the club could pay them a wage, so they wouldn't have to have a conflict with having a job outside of work whilst trying to do their training. I mean, I must say, it's incredible what these players sacrificed and gave up to play for Arsenal at a time when they would have earned more money and had maybe potentially had a better life just not playing football. But they chased this dream of playing football, and it's a debt we will forever be grateful for. But Fulham went professional. They were very much right at the bottom of the league, but they said, we're going to go fully professional. The owner at times said, we'll throw real money at this team. So what happened was they took all the best teams from the top division and brought them back quite a few levels down, and they just skyrocketed through the seasons. Every single season, promotion. By the time we get to 2002, 2003, they are top of the league, and they romp the title. They win the treble. They go unbeaten. They blow Arsenal out the water. They actually slump to third. But after that season, the problem is they're leading the charge trying to be professional, but the rest of the league is just not in a position to do so. So the money dries up. They downshift. They become semi-professional. Arsenal move in, and they win the league in 2003, 2004. So famously, that season, the men went unbeaten, and they lift the league against Leicester at Highbury. A few minutes later, Arsenal play Fulham at Highbury in one of the greatest title deciders ever, because it's a three-way tie between Charlton Athletic, Fulham and Arsenal for the title, and the rules are, if it's a draw, Charlton win the league. If it's a win for Fulham, they win the league, and if Arsenal win, they win the league. It's that close. With 5 minutes to go, it's 2-1 to Arsenal, so the game is completely on a knife edge, and Ellen Maggs wins it 3-1 for Arsenal. It's a very crucial point in Arsenal's history. One, because they lost one league game, which is away at Charlton Athletic. After that is their last defeat for 108 games in a league campaign. Because it's one of those great things you don't realise at the time. They lost 2-1 away at the Valley to Charlton. The next game was away at Fulham, and they draw 1-1 with a 96th minute equaliser from Ciara Grant, and from then on they go unbeaten. This is also the first of 9 league titles in a row. So from 2004 all the way through, well, you can do the maths, but all the way through to 2012, they win the league every single season, and they go unbeaten in every season from 2004-05 all the way through to 7-8. They don't lose a single game. And it is at this point, when we talk about the illustrious history of Arsenal, this is the peak. This is the greatest moment of Arsenal women's history. They've not come close to this. And this is when Arsenal are in their absolute prime. This is when Vic Akers' prime. This is when they have the likes of Leanne Sanderson, Julie Fleeting, legendary Scottish striker, one of the greatest strikers we've ever had. Julie Fleeting, Leanne Sanderson, Jane Ludlow, Kelly Smith is now in the team, and just it is Harlem Globetrotters. It is the greatest team ever. Rachel Yank. I could reel off like so many names there, but it's just they are, and I wouldn't do it justice. There is almost like an overabundance of talent in that side that just no side can compete with. The likes of Charlton and Everton battle gamely with Arsenal and get a few draws. Charlton pick off a few cup trophies every now and then, but in the league, it is hammer blow. And then they get to the apex, the absolute pinnacle, which is a legendary season, which is 2006-2007, when they win every game in the league season. They win the League Cup, they win the FA Cup, and most importantly, they win the European Cup. It's a trophy they've been trying to get since the competition started in the early 2000s, and they get to the final, and they get to Umea, who were just, again, modern day counterpart, Umeå were fully professional. They had the likes of Marta, one of the greatest Brazilian players of all time, who is still playing. She's still tearing up the NWSL. A very young Ramona Bachmann, who is still playing. And Arsenal beat them 1-0. Alex Scott, it's down in legend. Everyone knows this now. It's so iconic story. But Alex Scott wins 1-0 in Umeå. It comes back to Meadow Park. It's a 0-0 draw. One of the most nerve-shredding 0-0 draws you'll ever see. But they cling on. Emma Byrne makes a series of fantastic saves. They win that European Cup. But the problem is, because it is a season of such perfection, where they only draw 2 games, and they're both in Europe, and they were both second leg results. They draw 2-2 away in Bromby in their first leg, in a game where Kelly Smith famously got sent off, and then the final was a 2-legged affair. They draw their second leg 0-0 against Umeå. Those are the only 2 games they drew. They don't lose a game. They win all their domestic games. And it's actually the first game I ever saw, an Arsenal ladies game, as there was the FA Cup final in 2007. And that's what first made me aware of the Arsenal women, the Arsenal ladies, and was sort of the first stepping stone on this journey, even if I didn't realise it at the time. And they beat Charlton Athletic 4-1 in that final. The problem is, you reach that point and you can't go any higher. There's only one direction. You can't go any higher. So there's only one way you can go, and it's one of those things. It's very slow. It's very subtle, but the team has reached its peak, and there's a slow depreciation. So they don't retain the League Cup the next season. They lose that to Everton. They get knocked out by Lyon, a rising Lyon, who become the European juggernauts for the future, but they get knocked out by them. You reach 2008-2009, which is Vic Haker's last season. This is when he's finally said, I can't take this team any further. And again, it's a legendary title challenge. Arsenal go toe for toe with Everton all the way to the final day. Everton break the 108-game winning run with a 3-0 win at Meadow Park.
103 games.
Yeah. Both teams draw 1 game each. They get to the final game of the season, which is away at Everton. The last game of the season. Everton are 3 points ahead of Arsenal, but have a lesser goal difference. Arsenal win 1-0 and take the title off Everton at Everton's ground on goal difference in the last game of the season, which Vacakes sadly wasn't there for. He was kit man for the men, so he was elsewhere. So I think it was Emma Hazen with touchline. But they also won the FA Cup. They also won the League Cup. They didn't win the European Cup because they played Umeå, as it happens, and Marta destroyed them 6-0. She scored 4 goals and Umeå won 6-0 in the second leg and just blew them out the water. There was also another key moment that happened around the winter time when a lot of the key Arsenal players moved to America because an NWSL was setting up a fully professional league. So they lost the likes of Kelly Smith, they lost the likes of Alex Scott, they lost Karen Carney, another legendary player. And so the team there was a depreciation of the team. So they lost their manager, their big hitters all departed. Like Leanne Sanderson, she'd gone to Chelsea. Chelsea was starting to become a bigger team. As it went on, there's a depreciation of a depreciation. The WSL comes in, revamp, which has led to a new league, the top league. So originally it was the FA Women's Premier League National Division. The WSL becomes a tier above them. Only, I think it was 8 teams at the time. Obviously, it's expanded since, and Arsenal were one of them. They win the first 2 seasons, but at the time, the Laura Harvey, who would come in as manager, departs for America. And this is when we reach the bottom of the barrel. This is when we reach the dark ages. Shelley Kerr comes in. Arsenal lose their opening game at Emirates Stadium, because they're now playing Emirates Stadium occasionally, to Liverpool 4-0. They don't win the league title. They drop to 3rd. And then the following season, they lose 3 home games in a row in their first 4 games of the season. Shelley Kerr resigns. Arsenal finished 4th. They are out of Europe. They get knocked out of Europe by Birmingham City. And team now, the likes of Kay Smith and Alex Scott come back, but they're very much experienced players. They're not at their peak. There hasn't been a succession strategy. We see this with so many big teams, like on the men's. Look at Manchester United. So great and so Titanic for so long, but they haven't come back. There's been a depreciation there. There hasn't been a proper succession, and the team has suffered. You saw this with Arsenal. Chelsea came in with the money they had, and they really went big on the women's team, as is Manchester City. Arsenal, from 2012, just nosedive down and just basically loiter in 3rd place and just become a cup team and just pick up league and FA Cups. And that is actually, sadly, is we're still there now in a way. We're not as bad as that. We have had good moments. We've won one league title since then, which is 2018-19. We've won quite a few League Cups. We've won one FA Cup, which was in 2016. And of course, we won the Champions League last season.
Yeah.
But since 2013, in what is now 13 years, Arsenal have never really truly recaptured the real pure glory of the Vic Akers peak. And that pretty much takes us to the present day.
Yeah. One of the all-time modern great Arsenal teams, when you mention them, when they did hit that peak, like you said, when you hit the peak, the only way you can go is down. You know, it's a really cheesy way of saying it, but it is what it is. You know, there's a lot that you've mentioned there that's really important and is really important to our discussion of the archive. But obviously, before we touch on that, like having such a rich and storied history means the creation of so many memories. And there's a lot of items that you can include in an archive for that and from that. So, you know, anything from the kits that were worn during a historic victory, the footballs that were used, the boots that were worn, but also not things worn by the players and used by the club, but also personal items as well that fans have handed in, ticket stubs from the day, scarves from the day, badges, things like that. There's so much that can be included in football archives, and there's a lot of different dynamics and elements around that as well.
A lot of memorabilia. I'm not very much a memorabilia collector, so my focus is very much on the digital. And digital preservation. There's a line in one of my favorite video games, which is Metal Gear Solid: Sons of Liberty. But it's all about the internet and legacy. And there's a great line, which is that the human memory is extremely limited, which it is, but digital information lasts forever, which is up for debate. But it's certainly the idea that stuff on the internet stays on the internet. That's something that stuck with me, and it's stuck with the importance of keeping a record of this, so it is not lost. So it's not lost. It's not just relying on people's memories. Things that are handwritten can be lost. But stuff that stays on the internet usually sticks, which brings on to another great tool, which is the Internet Archive. That has been a superb tool. So Arsenal used to keep it, well, still do, but in the past have kept match reports on their website. But that website has evolved so many times over the years that a lot of the old reports have been lost and the old layouts have been lost. But thankfully, the Internet Archive, it is a bit of roulette. It is a bit of just sticking your fishing rod into the mire and hoping something bites. And you really are trying to get in through the computer back door, if you will. But having done that, that's been a brilliant way to retrieve a lot of, again, match reports, lineups, and data. It has been preserved to some extent. Not everything, sadly, but one of the importance with the archive is that digital preservation, whether it be photos, videos, match report links, just an anchor to that point in the past, so we don't have to scramble in the dark and try and find it. We got a point. So we can go, there's the evidence, there's the proof that this happened, and this is the question. However, which is interesting, and this is very much going quite philosophical, is that you can't prove if it's true. The importance of historical records and the importance of accuracy at its time is that what you are writing will be the truth for years to come.
Correct.
Not necessarily the truth of what happened. And there's been a lot of issues with historical record keeping, especially in the early years, especially women's football, when I've had different match reports showing different goal scorers or different kickoff times, different dates. And it's so important that stuff is accurate. And I've had conflicting sources, so I've had to sort of make an educated guess. So whilst I have that evidence and I can prove I'm not guessing, I'm having to trust that is precisely correct. And that's the trade-off.
Yes, exactly. I'm going to go off on a quick tangent here because you mentioned there the digitization side of things, and I completely agree with you. So in my day job, we work with a number of rural and really localized heritage groups. And two of them have recently decided to approach us for funding so that they can effectively preserve their small village local archives. One of the archives has been collected over the space of about 40 or 50 years by one villager. Has been kept in a damp room, so a lot of the stuff is in really bad condition. A lot of the stuff is now destroyed. So they are trying to digitize what is left of it. And this is what's great about digitization, is that it means that you can take an archive that is either on its way to being lost or is otherwise inaccessible and make it accessible not just to the people that you are doing the archive for, but also to the wider public for research purposes, which is really, really good. But also in the case of women's football, like you said, it's so important that we actually make effort to preserve, because there's so little of it that actually exists. I mean, you alluded to it earlier on, the beginnings of the Arsenal women's team, and it's the same for many women's teams, if not all of them. The beginnings of them is incredibly hazy. You don't get that to the same extent with men's teams. You just don't.
No.
And even the reporting in the early days of men's football was far more accurate than it was for women's football at any point.
So, funny you mentioned that, because in fact this week we had a bit of a breakthrough, which is winding it back to the Home Counties League. So this is the late 80s. I was talking with some other fellow historians who, and this is again the way this is sort of snowballed, is with historical preservation, is you meet other people who are also on the same journey, who know other people who are on this journey, and they have their own sources and people to contact.
Yeah.
And through that, I was able to get in contact with one of the people who actually ran the Home Counties League.
Oh, fantastic.
Who had kept written records of results, player names who had signed up for Arsenal, and fixtures and so forth. And I cannot thank them enough. They were able to send pictures of their handwritten work to me, which suddenly just opened so many doors, because suddenly so many gaps in my data, boom, get filled. But this is data that didn't exist. This was not this was not on an online website. This was not in a spreadsheet somewhere. This was handwritten work.
Yeah, it's oral history.
Written history, and it's crazy when you think that, someone doing it. What you do now, you may think no one's going to care about, but one person 20 years in the future, they are going to want what you've written down. They are going to want what you've recorded. You don't know it at the time, and I cannot thank this person enough, because I would hazard to guess that that is the only source, or certainly the only source I know, of this recording. And so we talk about the Arsenal Women Archive. My other thing, and probably my bigger, more dominant thing now, and where is going, is with Wikipedia, and writing out a lot of the seasons of Arsenal in Wikipedia. Again, digital preservation. It is very much the front line of information.
Yep.
This has been able to basically game change about 2 of the seasons to actually say this is the season that happened. If you go to a lot of those season pages now, a lot of them, the results are great because I don't know the other results. 2 of the seasons have just gone ping. I now know the full story of the season, and that's because someone took the time to actually handwrite this down. I'm now working with the Arsenal club as well with this. I've passed later on to them. Because they're doing their own historical work. They're trying to find out all the players and all the results as well. Again, it's our Venn diagrams, our trajectories have overlapped, and we sort of met in the middle, and we're working together on there. And it's to do this is it can't just be me, as much as it feels like it. There are as the mantle of responsibility, honestly, there are so many people who it needs to work together, and so many people I need to find, who I'm pretty sure have, as you say, something in the loft. They've written down these results, and they don't know that I need this, and I don't say the world needs this, but I think that it is needed for the world, so that we're not in a position where I don't know Arsenal's first home ground. I don't know Arsenal ladies' first game.
Yeah.
Like, that can't happen. That can't be true, that you don't know the first team, that first lineup. So someone somewhere knows this. Someone, as you say, have it in the loft, has it written down, or has a program from that era. And if they do, I mean, this is very much a call to arms now. Get in touch with me, please.
It's like you said earlier, though, like these are anchors to points in the past,
yes.
And these are the origins of the club. Do you know what I mean? And having that anchor point is so important for the heritage and the identity of a football club. And I'm going to provide some important context in another story here. So, like I was saying to you off air, we've done some work before, not through this project, and other projects with Dr. Fiona Skillen, who is a doctor at Glasgow University and has done a huge amount of work for preserving and promoting the history of women's football in Scotland, particularly through the story of Rutherglen Ladies. Rutherglen Ladies were one of the teams that popped up during World War One, who played charity matches while the men were away, attracting crowds of anywhere between 20 and 30,000 people. And then, of course, when the men came back, women were banned from playing football because all of a sudden the FA became afraid that the men's game wouldn't be as popular. Okay, a huge slap in the face to these women who had effectively raised money and kept morale high while people were fighting in World War One. Dr. Fiona Skillen began the process of telling this story and actually archiving the memorabilia and the details from them. But obviously, despite there being a ban on women's football, this is the thing, there was a ban, but it wasn't illegal. When we say ban, what we mean is the Scottish Football Association refused to support it in any means. Clubs and local authorities were discouraged from letting women play on greens and parks, public spaces. But that doesn't mean that women didn't play. Women did play. They played a lot, and they actually had their own league setups, but it just wasn't promoted. It was very much under the radar so that they could keep playing football and so that they didn't get into trouble or be shunned. Remember all of the different stigmas attached to women playing football, particularly in the 20s, 30s and 40s, etc. So what Dr. Fiona Skillen found was that actually there is a wealth of information that exists out there, but people were just afraid of bringing it forward. Instead of it being given to a museum or an archive, it's been tucked away in an attic or a loft. So, it's personal preservation in a way, which is great, but people forget about these things, forget where they come from. And it's not actually the players that are handing them in, it's their relatives or their children after the person has passed away. And they've never told this story. So now all we have is this one physical representation of it without any story or without any context. So Fiona Skillen then took an exhibition around different local town halls around Lanarkshire, and the amount of people that she had coming forward with stories that added to the Rutherglen ladies' story as a whole was incredible, because all of these people had items that their family members or that they had related to playing the game that they just didn't come forward with because they thought they would get in trouble or they thought they would be shunned. It's incredible when you actually do some outreach where women's football is concerned, what you can find.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate with this because if anybody's been going to the Arsenal games and have been reading the matchday programmes, there's been a section now where a chap called Tim Stillman has been doing interviews with former Arsenal women's players, and they are, especially the really, really early years, they are so humble about what they've done. And for me, they are brilliant because I think they're amazing. But they say, oh, we were just they don't see. I don't think they see themselves as like when you think about the players nowadays. For them, it was always an amateur sport. It wasn't the fully professional. So for them, they love what they've done and they love the club, and they've kept so much like material, newspaper cuttings and pictures and information. And I've been very fortunate enough to be able to actually reach out to some of these players. I was talking to another fan of Arsenal, and they said, "Oh, I had a kickabout with this person who said, she played for Arsenal." And I said, "Oh, so tell me her name." And she said, "Tell me." I'm thinking, "Yeah, I know who she is." And she said, "Oh yeah, apparently she's got a load of old like matchday programs that she's played in, and she even actually got some video footage of one of the games she played in." I was like, "She's got what?" And I've gone in and I've spoken with the player, and she said, and we were able to work it out, and she was able to scan all the information in it, and she said, "Yeah, she's had this stuff like boxed up. She's had like highlights of when she played in a cup final. She's got matchday programs. She's got newspaper cuttings of when she's played in the game. It's got the goal scorers." I'm thinking, this is exactly the stuff I need. So many players have the information. There was another player I spoke to who sent me a lot of pictures of, again, newspaper clippings and stuff. And I'm looking, thinking, this is information I need. This plugs gaps in my data. There's so many players out there who, yes, they've loved the club and they've kept that memorabilia, as you say. Obviously, it's personal, and this is why I want to picture it so they don't have to take it off them because it's theirs. It's
of course, yeah.
But it's like there's like team pictures of them, team photos, and thinking this is fantastic stuff. And that's been one of the So again, one of the clips says it's going to go on the video archive hopefully next year, as it's been scheduled in. It's been which is actually a really, really good find. But yeah, so much information. There's another one when I spoke to the library at Charlton. A great team, and they were able to provide me a lot of information and programs. And on their YouTube channel, I found a clip of a game an Arsenal game. I'm thinking, well, where did you find this? And as we got more, and he said, "Oh, this was one of the ex-directors who was having clear out in his loft, and he found this clip of the Charlton ladies playing Arsenal." And I said, "Does he have any more?" I said, "No, it's just that 5-second clip." And I was thinking, well, I know it's a bit of
it's better than nothing, though. It's better than
nothing. It's a small window, but again, that was like, this is a brilliant find, because like I've been very curious about this game, and again, that's scheduled to go on the archive. I think it's going to come up later this year, and it's a real find, even though it's one of these things where there's a lot of like some of the video clips I found is squirreled away on YouTube, but it's in such a dark corner and in the past, no one knows about it. And it's only often by chance I stumble upon these things, and that's one I'm really grateful for the Charlton Museum for keeping hold of, and will hopefully come out later.
Yeah, this is one of the big things, and this applies widely, much more widely just to heritage organisations and preservation in general. But collaborating with your fellow museums is so important, because they might have something that you don't know about. This is the thing, like, although we have museums specific to our clubs, like every other museum and every other archive in the world, football or otherwise, people move around. They do things in different places, so they might have something that we don't. But I think it just, like, coming back to what I was saying earlier, it speaks to the difficulties sometimes in archiving the history of women's football, because sometimes you must just feel that the information just doesn't exist, but it is out there. We just need the people to come forward and help with it, but it's understandable why they might not want to.
So this brings me on to one of the points I want to raise, which is maybe jumping ahead slightly, but this is, again, the obvious question: why I created this video archive. Because one of the things is, this is something I've created started a few years ago, because again, I came to Arsenal at a certain point in time. I missed out on a lot of the past, and I've wanted to, and because the past is notorious, I want to watch it, and I can't, because there has been no records, or there are records that aren't in the public domain. They aren't they aren't highlights, and a lot of highlights disappear off websites. They're on YouTube for limited times, and they go private. So I was trying to dig around and find what I can, and I found an old YouTube channel which had a lot of highlights from the WSL era of Arsenal, which I recorded. And then the YouTube account unlists all their videos. And that was sort of the moment for me when I realized, well, hang on a minute, no one else knows this. No one else can see these videos anymore. And the women's football is growing. It's exploded now. Ever since the Euros in 2022, the women's football has just gone, not just in nuclear, but it is there's exponential growth. It is everywhere. It's on billboards. It's on adverts. The attendances obviously are very much rose tinted. Arsenal attendances, all the games at Emirates Stadium, we get amazing crowds and amazing atmosphere. There are question marks about the other teams, but there are so many new fans coming to Arsenal who hear about Arsenal and see the records on the ribbon around the stadium and see the artworks from the stadium, but will have no means of actually experiencing or learning about that history. And that's when the idea of this video archive came about. So it was set up because on the men's side, there are people who post like clips of like men's games from years ago. And Arsenal as a club, they often do, like, on this day, Gilberto scored against PSV, and they'll put a little clip up. So I thought, well, why don't I just do something similar? Why don't I do something similar and just have on this day, this game played so many years ago, and I can schedule them all in advance. I've got a lot of clips, and then it became well, I need to now try and find as much footage as possible. And the amount of rabbit holes and warrens and the tangents and frustrations and loose ends, finding videos from the Internet Archive, finding clips on long discarded YouTube channels, clips on like social media sites like Facebook and Twitter /X, and piecing together and trying to find as much footage as possible. And one of the great things of history, I know, was forum people have said, we have found all the history that is to be found. We cannot find any more history. And it happens all the time. I said, right, okay, I found everything. I can't find any more. And then about 2 weeks later, be like, oh, good, I found another source, and I found some more. Like, it's great. Like even now, I got to the point where I said at the end of last year, I thought, okay, I have exhausted everything. I have uploaded everything. I cannot go any further. And this was just in terms of like video preservation. And then only a few weeks ago, I found some clips, some games I just stumbled upon just by complete chance. I was like, hang on a minute, this is a game I don't have. I mentioned that the clip from the Charlton history, I didn't have the game. I thought, well, now I've got to get this on the site. And this is now a bit of a sort of lead into the future of the archive. Is I was originally going to say, right, okay, I have everything's up there. I'm now going to take it one step further instead, because it has been up until now a video preservation site so people can rewatch games. But there are so many games that sadly were never taped. There was only I mentioned those VHS tapes or season review DVDs. Often they would have just one game. It'd be the league game when they won the league, or it'd be a cup final, or it'd be like one goal or a few interviews. So now what I'm going to do is the archive will now upload every single game.
Brilliant.
That I know asterisk, from 1991, so from the start of the league, the National League history, which was from 1991 to 2021. For me, this is my own adventure, but for me, I want to be very sort of careful with the archive, because I don't want to sort of, the C word, copyright, obviously, yes. But there's also an element of like, beyond 2021, there is enough content out there sort of digitally with highlights on YouTube. Obviously, the likes of Sky do their highlights and the BBC. There is enough content out there and on the Arsenal website as well that it doesn't need me, because they have done the work.
Yeah.
Up until 2021 season, so the COVID lockdown season. The COVID lockdown season was the first season when every single Arsenal women's game, the video highlights were full highlights, shall we say, were preserved online. They were recorded online. There were some. Every season before that, there was one or two, often in the League Cup, there were games which there was no video footage of, or no complete video footage of, which is crazy when you think about it. That is only 5 years ago, or 5, 6 years ago, when they said, and that was, I think, again, because of COVID, it needed to happen because people couldn't go to the games. And so, since then, every game has got a video highlights you can find on the Arsenal website or another YouTube channel. But before then, there are games that are missing. So that's always been my line in the sand. And 1991 is because that is the furthest back I can go with a season where I know all the games have happened.
Yeah.
So there's going to be a 20-year dump of every league, FA Cup, League Cup, and Champions League game, either as a video or as a match report link, or match report picture, or a newspaper cutting, or in some cases nothing at all. It's just a result, but it's a way of being able to paint up the entire history and also raise awareness.
Yes.
Raise awareness of not just what I know, but also more importantly what I don't know. And by hopefully doing that, there'll be people who can come forward, because I've had ex-players like share some of my stuff, and there's a love for it, because people go, oh, that was me in that game.
Exactly.
That was me scoring that goal. I've had that really, and hopefully we're raising that. Someone might go, oh, I know that game. I've got some stuff in my loft that actually explains what happened in the game, and then that's now the next level of the archive. It's providing a means for the whole of the Arsenal fandom, which is growing exponentially from the women's side, to properly learn and appreciate everything about the Arsenal women, to give exposure to all the players so their stories can be celebrated. Again, one of the great things is not just celebrating the great players, but also shining a light on those players who people may not have heard of and not known about. There was a wonderful clip Arsenal did with their website. They did a thing where you got to guess who was the ex-player. And the ex-player was Ellen Maggs. And none of the other players knew who she was. But I mentioned her, she scored the winner in a league game that won us the league. She scored in Community Shield. She was a really good player for us, and her story isn't as well known, sadly. And this was a means of obviously giving them a bit of the limelight. There's a very famous game stuck in my mind, and it's a more recent. There was a League Cup tie. I think it was against London Bees or Bristol City, but we battered them like 8-0 or something. And Katie McCabe scored a hat-trick. And so the social media thought it'd be quite nice to share the video of Katie McCabe scoring that hat-trick. There was another player who scored a hat-trick on that day, which was a youth player. I think it's called Mel Phillis. And it never got shown. And it's an element of, if you were a better player and a more notorious player, famous player, and you did something great, that sort of trumps something else, which I don't think is fair. And so it's getting those players to have their story told as well.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point as well. And I think that's a point that can be applied to archiving as a whole. Like, why should we be championing one player over the other?
Absolutely.
Especially when it comes to women's football as well. And again, like you mentioned with archiving, we need to be so careful when we choose what to archive, because we've had this dearth of knowledge in the past. We have these knowledge gaps still. So it's about making sure that we don't make the same mistakes in that regard as well. And just kind of going back to when you were talking about, the kind of, your process for archiving things and how you find things and discover things. It's incredible when you think about the football clubs who have all their records available, and then for a club as large as Arsenal Women, from where they came from, again, just to talk about the difficulties of archiving and what people who archive within women's football history have to deal with. There is often the case that there is just nothing, which is incredibly sad, and it just means that we need to push and, I actually kind of champion efforts to make this happen. But one thing that I wanted to ask you just before we finish up, what is your favourite item or story that you have discovered through the Arsenal Women's Archive? Because, like you said, like, and this kind of goes back to one of the episodes that we've done with ANSIF, who are one of our proud partners, the football investigators of CONCACAF, as they like to be called. But basically, like you just alluded to, you always think that you have found something historical, or that the origin point, the anchor point, like you put it. But these guys are discovering new history every single day, which I just think is fascinating, and you're the exact same.
I've got a few. So one of my favourite video finds was finding highlights of the first Women's Champions League final. Well, UEFA Women's Cup final at the time, the second leg at Meadow Park. I'd wanted to find it for years because it's a momentous moment, but because it's a 0-0 draw, it's not that exciting. even though it's probably one of the most exciting 0-0 draws you ever find, because it is absolutely on a knife edge, and that was buried deep within the Internet Archive on a DVD that was preserved. And I found it, thankfully, someone else had found it on TikTok, and I messaged them. I said, "Where did you find this footage?" And they pointed me in the right direction. Sadly, that TikTok account no longer exists. So then they were doing a lot of preservation as well of men's and women's football. So I found that footage and shared it. I thought, this is brilliant, and it's a proper highlights commentary of the lot. But one of the more recent ones, and this is quite a fun one for me, is how one bit of human error can redact an entire bit of history. So there is a game called there was a competition called the London County Cup. Actually, there's actually one more to add on there, but to the London County Cup, and that is it was a sort of sub competition, often played with youth players, but Arsenal usually went quite competitive in it. And one season, it was like a quarter final, semi final, final sort of setup for us. We won the quarter final against a team called Abbeydale, I think it was. And then after that, the trail went cold. We had no idea what happened after. We didn't know if we'd been kicked out of the competition, if the competition had been cancelled. What we found was, having by chance digging around the Internet Archive on the Charlton website, speaking with the Charlton Museum, we found that the game had played. Arsenal were drawn against Charlton Athletic, and they lost the game 3-2 in extra time. So then we had to go on a rampage of trying to find matchday programs from the men's side to try and find out where this result was, because it's not in the end of season statistics. Arsenal do like a yearbook, and they do like statistics from all the results and stuff, and there's nothing for this game. And we eventually found the sweet spot where we found the program where they had actually recorded it in the results, but on the next day the result has disappeared. It's been erased. And it was like, well, we found the result. We don't know who the goal scorer is. It's one of the few games in the 2000s where we don't know the Arsenal goal scorers from the game, and it's been redacted from history. And that is the danger of talk about historical not incorrect preservation. But the best story, I think, is and I should say it wasn't found by me, but I was discussing my attempts with a colleague of mine, Chris Garrett, who would be we're very much a partnership on this, and we've been working extensively on this together. He's been doing a lot of stuff with spreadsheets and data, and I've been doing sort of the video side, and we're sort of working together. But in one of our group chats, someone said, "Oh, I found this video on a picture website. It's like I think it was called Alamy, I think it was. It's right spread from a cup final." We think it's got a picture of Renee Slagers in. So Renee Slagers is our manager now, but she had a time playing for Arsenal in the academy. We know she played in this London County Cup tie. And we looked at it, and it's a picture of her in the team photo, Plum Centre. It's Renee Slagers, a very, very young Renee Slagers. So we sent it to the club and said, we think this is Renee Slagers. We're pretty confident it is. And it's since been used in the material when she signed her contract recently. It's been in some of the champions. I think it's in the Champions League or one of the programs, or when she was. I think it was they did a special book when we won the Champions League, and her pictures in there, and it's circled. So the one we found is being used now by the club, and it's just a brilliant story. Again, Renee Slagers, our manager now, but again, so much of her history, and this was in 2006-07, is not known. She played in the final against Millwall Lionesses. Kelly Smith scored 2 goals. A few days later, Arsenal fly out to Sweden, and Alex Scott scores the winner in the European Cup final, and that is very much the bigger story. But it means that sadly this little cup final against Millwall Lionesses, which contributed to Arsenal's 6th trophy haul that season, if you can include that in the Community Shield, Renee Slagers played in, and very little is known about it, sadly. And that's the way history goes sometimes.
Yeah, it is. But fantastic story, and like I said, it's amazing when you're the one that discovers and helps to discover these things, because you're the one that's found it. And again, it's not just about finding it, because people hold this information, but the importance, and to me, this kind of goes into my day job, but the importance of community heritage and heritage engagement is being able to reach local people and local groups who hold the information. Ultimately, they're the people who hold the knowledge and the power in these situations, and it's about making it accessible to the wider public and other people who want to see it. And I think that's something that we can all push more towards when it comes to football preservation, but particularly when it comes to women's football. Adam, this has been a fantastic chat. Is there anything that you want to add just before we finish up for today?
Well, the main thing is for anyone listening who has any history of the Arsenal women, please get in touch. If you have results, if you've got player profiles, if you've got women's matchday programs, are an absolute godsend at the moment. So we can say for Arsenal men's, for example, the Arsenal said we have kept copies of every single men's matchday program. They've got it at the club. They don't have that for the women's side. I can find them on eBay sometimes, and sometimes elsewhere. But if you have any data from Arsenal women, ladies from the 90s, from the 80s, do get in touch. because it's just another piece in that jigsaw puzzle, and just makes I can stitch that tapestry in greater detail so we can all learn about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would second that. We will put links to the Arsenal Women's Archive and how you can support them in the show notes for this episode. So to any of our listeners who want to go and help them out, please do. But Adam, thank you very much for joining us today. To all of our listeners, thank you very much for tuning into this episode. If there are any questions, if you want to help Adam in his quest to preserve all of Arsenal women's history, then please do get in touch. Or if you want to suggest an episode yourself, you can get in touch as well. You can DM us on any of our social media, and also email us at hello@footballheritage.co.uk as well. We're well rolling now for 2026. We'll see you next week. Goodbye.